From Pacifica, this is Democracy Now!
The missile that kills us, American-made. The plane that kills us, American-made. The tanks, Abrams, American-made. You're saying to me, where is America? America is the whole thing.
American-made bombs in Yemen are killing civilians, destroying infrastructure, and fueling anger at the U.S. That's the title of a new PBS NewsHour report. This is UN Humanitarian Coordinator Lise Grande.
The reality of their life is that when they wake up in the morning, they have no idea if they will eat that day. No idea. 8.5 million people are in that category. The UN estimates that by the end of the year, if there is not an end to this war, another 10 million Yemenis will be in that same situation. That's 18 million innocent civilians who are the victims of this war.
We'll speak with PBS correspondent Jane Ferguson, who smuggled herself into Yemen for her remarkable three-part PBS series. But first, we go to Pakistan, which has suffered the third deadliest attack in the country's history, just as it's set to hold general elections overshadowed by hundreds of arrests and accusations of widespread interference by the military.
The Army's role in this election is only to support the Election Commission of Pakistan. We will support them in all the tasks they have requested. The Pakistani military will have no direct role in the conduct of the elections.
We'll go to Lahore to speak with journalist and writer Munazeh Jahangir. All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. President Donald Trump continued to sow confusion Tuesday over whether he believes Russia's meddling in U.S. elections, a day after he said he misspoke in a Helsinki news conference following his summit with Russian President Vladimir Putin. On Monday, Trump tried to walk back his remark that he didn't see any reason why Russia would have meddled in the 2016 election after intelligence officials and lawmakers of both parties decried his comments as treasonous. On Tuesday, Trump appeared to go a step further in his reversal, telling CBS News he held Putin personally responsible for interfering in U.S. elections.
Do you agree with U.S. intelligence that Russia meddled in the election in 2016?
Yeah, and I've said that before, Jeff. I have said that numerous times before, and I would say that that is true, yeah.
But you haven't condemned Putin specifically. Do you hold him personally responsible?
Well, I would, because he's in charge of the country, just like I consider myself to be responsible for things that happen in this country. So certainly, as the leader of a country, you would have to hold him responsible, yes.
Trump's assertion came as his hand-picked FBI director, Christopher Wray, told NBC News Russia's efforts to subvert U.S. elections remain very active. When asked by a reporter Tuesday if Russia was continuing to target the U.S., Trump replied no, twice.
Is Russia still targeting the U.S., Mr. President?
Press,
let's go. Make your way out. No, you don't believe that to be the case? Let's go. We're going to.
At the White House, Press Secretary Sarah Huckabee Sanders said Trump's no remark was aimed at ending reporters' questions and was not actually a response to a question about Russian interference.
We had a chance to speak with the president after those comments, and the president said thank you very much and was saying no to answering questions.
This comes as the White House said it won't rule out a request by Vladimir Putin to have the Russian government question former U.S. diplomatic personnel, including former ambassador to Russia, Michael McFaul, now a professor at Stanford. Critics have blasted the Trump administration's proposal as an assault on the principle of diplomatic immunity. It came as part of a proposal by Putin that would allow U.S. investigators to interview 12 Russians named in indictment by Special Counsel Robert Mueller's investigation earlier this month, claiming they were part of a plot to interfere with the 2016 elections. In exchange, Russian investigators would be granted interviews in the U.S. with Ambassador McFaul and 10 other Americans, including Bill Browder, an outspoken opponent of Putin. In 2009, Browder's lawyer and accountant, the Russian whistleblower Sergei Magnitsky, died in a Russian jail under suspicious circumstances. His death became the basis of a U.S. sanctions law against Russia, the Magnitsky Act. President Trump questioned a key provision of the NATO military alliance, the mutual defense of NATO member countries. Trump made the remark during an interview with Fox News host Tucker Carlson.
Why should my son go to Montenegro to defend it from attack? Why is that?
I understand what you're saying. I've asked the same question. You know, Montenegro is a tiny country with very strong people.
Yeah, I'm not against Montenegro or Albania.
No, by the way, they're very strong people. They're very aggressive people. They may get aggressive. And congratulations, you're in World War III.
In Illinois, state officials are investigating the Chicago nonprofit Heartland Alliance over allegations it housed children separated from their parents at the U.S.-Mexico border, with many of the children reportedly suffering abuse and neglect. The Washington Post reported one boy at Heartland Alliance's facility, Casa Guadalupe, was repeatedly injected with a drug that made him drowsy, while another boy was denied medication for weeks after injuring his arm. The Washington Post also reports children were surveilled with hidden cameras and prevented from hugging their siblings. This comes ahead of a July 26 court-imposed deadline for the Trump administration to reunite all 3,000 separated children from their parents, and after the Trump administration said Monday it can't find the parents of 71 of the children. Former coal industry lobbyist Andrew Wheeler, the new acting administrator of the Environmental Protection Agency, approved a new rule Tuesday that guts restrictions on the handling of coal ash, the toxic waste generated at hundreds of coal-fired plants around the U.S. The new rules were put in place in 2015 after a string of high-profile toxic spills in North Carolina and Tennessee. Wheeler became acting head of the EPA earlier this month after former EPA head Scott Pruitt stepped down amidst a string of corruption scandals. In Yemen, Houthi rebels have claimed responsibility for a drone attack on a Saudi state oil company refinery in Riyadh. But the oil company, Saudi Aramco, said a fire at the refinery was due to an operational incident. This comes as Houthi leader Abdul Malik al-Houthi indicated rebels are prepared to hand over the crucial port of Hodeidah to the United Nations if the U.S.-backed Saudi-led coalition stops military operations there, which have forced tens of thousands of civilians to flee. The UN has warned the offensive may severely exacerbate the ongoing humanitarian crisis in Yemen, which is already experiencing the world's worst cholera epidemic, with more than 1 million people afflicted and with millions more on the brink of famine. We'll go to a report on Yemen later in the broadcast. In Israel, lawmakers approved a bill Tuesday that defines Israel as the nation-state of the Jewish people, prompting Palestinians to warn Israel is sliding further into a system of apartheid. The new law declares Hebrew the country's only official language, diminishing the status of Arabic. It also encourages the building of Jewish-only settlements in occupied territory as a national value. The bill passed in a vote of 62 to 55 over the objections of Arab-Israeli lawmakers who threw papers into the air in protest after its passage. This is parliamentarian Ahmed Tibi.
The nationality bill is a hate crime. They are totally discriminating against the Arab citizens, against the Arab minority, with racist articles, especially those of Jewish settlements, and those articles downgrading the status of the Arabic language.
In the Mediterranean, at least 19 people are dead and 25 others still missing after a boat carrying more than 100 migrants capsized at sea off the coast of Cyprus Tuesday. The deaths came as Italy and other European countries have launched a crackdown on ocean vessels carrying migrants hoping to claim asylum in Europe. In Mexico, President-elect Andrés Manuel López Obrador says he'll take a 60% pay cut after he's inaugurated in December as a gesture toward cracking down on wasteful spending and government corruption. The pledge came as López Obrador, also known as AMLO, said he's open to a debate on the legalization of drugs in Mexico in a bid to end the drug war that's seen tens of thousands of Mexicans killed. This comes days after top Trump administration officials traveled to Mexico City last week to meet with AMLO. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo was joined by senior White House advisor Jared Kushner and Homeland Security Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen. The European Union has ordered a multi-billion euro fine against Google for violating antitrust rules, saying the high-tech giant unfairly used its dominant Android operating system to squelch competition. This is the European Competition Commissioner announcing the fine Wednesday.
Today, the Commission has decided to fine Google €4.34 billion for breaching EU antitrust rules. Google has engaged in illegal practices to cement its dominant market position in Internet search.
In Thailand, 12 boys rescued from a flooded cave last week were released from a hospital in Chiang Rai on Tuesday, appearing fit and happy after an 18-day ordeal that grabbed international headlines. After their release, the boys appeared with their soccer coach at a group press conference, telling reporters they were overjoyed when a pair of British divers first discovered them 9 days after they became trapped, and mourned the death of one of the Thai divers who tried to rescue them. In California, hot weather and bone-dry conditions have fueled a number of wildfires, including a 26-square-mile fire raging near Yosemite National Park. One firefighter's died. 2 others have been injured battling the blaze. The fires are being fueled by thousands of trees that died during an unprecedented drought that's gripped California for most of the last several years. In Japan, at least 12 people have died and nearly 10,000 others have been hospitalized after an intense heat wave settled in over much of Japan. In Gifu Prefecture, temperatures topped 105 degrees Fahrenheit Wednesday, the hottest temperature recorded in Japan in 5 years. The heat wave has prompted concerns about the 2020 Summer Olympics set to open in Tokyo 2 years from now. It comes on the heels of the most deadly flooding Japan has seen in decades after heavy rains killed at least 95 people and forced 2 million more people to flee their homes earlier this month. Scientists have linked record heat, heavy rainfall, and increased flooding to climate change. Muslim groups are condemning the U.S. and Canadian governments over a secretive terrorism watch list the 2 countries operate, saying innocent travelers have been stopped and interrogated and have had visas revoked after being falsely accused of ties to terror groups. Last month, The Guardian reported that the program Tip Off U.S.-Canada, or TUSCAN, began in 1997 but was expanded in 2016 under Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. The group Muslim Advocates has filed a Freedom of Information Act request demanding U.S. documents on TUSCAN, warning it could be part of a broader effort by President Trump to fulfill a campaign promise to create a registry of Muslims living in the U.S. In a statement, Muslim Advocate staff attorney Matthew Callahan said, quote, "The inaccuracy of the United States terrorist list is well documented, and their potential for misuse is compounded by President Trump's racially charged agenda. To then share this misinformation with another country is irresponsible and dangerous," he said. Papa John's founder, John Schnatter, told the pizza chain's board of directors he made a mistake when he stepped down as chairman amidst news reports he used a racial slur, the N-word, during a conference call in May. In a letter to Papa John's board, Schnatter complained he was pressured to resign without any investigation based on, quote, rumor and innuendo. Schnatter had already stepped down as CEO of the pizza chain earlier this year after he claimed that NFL player protests during the national anthem, which have been led by African-American players, were hurting his pizza sales. In breaking news, Spain's Supreme Court has withdrawn its international arrest warrants against former Catalonia President Carles Puigdemont and 5 others exiled Catalan politicians facing charges of rebellion. Last October, the Spanish government seized control of Catalonia after its leaders proceeded with a banned independence referendum. A new class action lawsuit on behalf of former wrestlers at Ohio State University accuses Republican Ohio Congressmember Jim Jordan of failing to prevent sexual abuse perpetrated by a university doctor. The men allege former team doctor Richard Strauss groped players on multiple occasions and that Jordan, who was then serving as assistant coach on the wrestling team, must have known about the molestation. Jordan has been floated as a possible replacement for outgoing Speaker of the House Paul Ryan and has denied any knowledge of sexual abuses. And a group of 141 survivors who went public about their sexual abuse by former USA gymnastics doctor Larry Nassar appeared on stage together Wednesday night to accept the Arthur Ashe Award for Courage at the annual ESPYs ceremony. 3-time Olympic gold medalist Ali Raceman stood in front of the group to receive the award.
All those years, we were told, "You are wrong. You misunderstood. He's a doctor. It's okay. Don't worry. We've got it covered. Be careful. There are risks involved." The intention? To silence us in favor of money, medals, and reputation. But we persisted, and finally, someone listened and believed us.
Also honored at the ESPY Awards were the 3 coaches killed in the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School Valentine's Day massacre. They were honored as Coaches of the Year. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman.
And I'm Nermeen Sheikh. Welcome to our listeners and viewers around the country and around the world. We begin today's show in Pakistan, where voters go to the polls next week. The run-up to the election has already been marred by deadly terrorist attacks, a crackdown on activists and journalists, hundreds of arrests, and accusations of widespread interference by the military. On Friday, a massive suicide bombing at an election campaign gathering in the southwestern province of Balochistan killed 149 people and injured another 200, making it the 3rd deadliest attack in Pakistan's history. The bombing targeted an election rally of the Balochistan Awami Party. ISIS claimed responsibility for the attack. Among those killed was a Balochistan Provincial Assembly candidate, Siraj Resani. This is the slain candidate's brother, Haji Lashkari Resani.
These kinds of incidents have been happening in our country's history. These incidents are condemned verbally and sympathies are also offered verbally, but no solid measures are taken to prevent them.
The attack in Balochistan was the 3rd such attack on election rallies in a week. Hours after the deadly bombing, former Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif and his daughter Maryam were arrested at Lahore's airport as they returned to Pakistan from London in efforts to bolster Sharif's political party, the Pakistan Muslim League Nawaz, or PMLN, one of the leading contenders in next week's elections. Their arrest came after Sharif, a 3rd-term prime minister, and his daughter were convicted in absentia in a corruption case that Sharif's supporters say was manufactured by the Pakistani military and intelligence services.
PMLN members allege their main rival, Pakistan's Movement for Justice, the anti-corruption party led by former cricket star Imran Khan, has the backing of the army, which has ruled the country for nearly half its 70-year history. If the vote goes ahead as planned, it'll be only the 2nd time Pakistan has made a transition from one civilian government to another. For more, we go directly to Lahore, Pakistan, to speak with journalist and writer Munize Jahangir. She's the host and executive producer of a political talk show on one of Pakistan's leading networks, and the daughter of Pakistan's leading human rights activist and lawyer who died earlier this year, Asma Jahangir. She's on the board of Asma Jahangir Foundation and a council member of Human Rights Commission of Pakistan. We welcome you to Democracy Now!, and since we haven't spoken since, our condolences on the death of your remarkable mother.
Well, thank you, and I want to thank all your team for the beautiful program that you did after she passed away. Thank you very much.
Well, Munize, if you can talk about what is happening in your country right now, in Pakistan, if you can begin with this 3rd deadliest attack that killed well over 100 people, and then fit it into the context of this election that's coming up next week.
Well, of course, this was the 3rd deadliest attack in Balochistan and Mastoon, which killed over 150 people. And at the moment, the death toll is even rising as we speak because there are injured, those who are critically injured. And we've just had a few deaths in the past week. I was at an election rally of Haroon Bilor, the Awami National Party, the secular party in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, a day before he was attacked and was killed in a suicide attack. And his party at that time blamed the other opponents. They said, we cannot we will have to investigate them in the next few days. And I recently interviewed their leader, Asfandiyar Wali Khan, who said that only one party was given a level playing field in this election, and he named Imran Khan. Of course, the ANP is contesting a direct election against Imran Khan's PTI, which is also very popular and had formed government in the previous government in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. But he complains that the other political parties are not being given the level playing field. He said that he was contesting an election against the Taliban in 2013, and in this election, again, the Taliban have already announced that they are going to target his party, and therefore he believes that his party is not being given this kind of level playing field. He also says that since his party is being targeted and not Imran Khan's, Imran Khan has gone ahead with political campaigns. We have seen with the Pakistan People's Party, which is headed by Bilawal Bhutto Zardari and his father, Asif Ali Zardari, just before the elections, there were cases that were brought up against them. There were accountability by the Accountability Court here in Pakistan, and those cases were later postponed till after the elections because that was the plea that Asif Ali Zardari and his sister took. However, it seems that sword hangs over their head. They have also not been able to campaign, and Bilawal Bhutto Zardari called off his party's campaign after the attack in Balochistan. Similarly, with the Pakistan Muslim League Noon, which is led by Nawaz Sharif, they were in government, in the federal government in 2013, and he has returned to be arrested with his daughter at the airport. What we faced, and I was on that flight which brought Nawaz Sharif and his daughter Maryam Nawaz back from Abu Dhabi to Lahore. There were many journalists on that flight, local TV journalists, and we were not allowed to air any of Nawaz Sharif's comment on our airwaves, on our TV talk shows. We were told that if we do air his comments or his interview, our TV channels will be blocked out for at least 1 week. Therefore, no private TV channel or the state TV channel aired the homecoming of Nawaz Sharif. There was one journalist whose show was pulled off air because he showed the kind of support that Nawaz Sharif had from his political workers who were getting together to welcome him at the airport. His show was taken off air. He did protest on Twitter and then went back on air. So at that time, there was a complete clampdown on the electronic media. Nawaz Sharif's statements were not allowed to be aired. His supporters were not allowed to be shown. And the police, according to the police, they arrested around 150 political workers. According to the PMLN, they arrested 300 workers on the 13th of July, the day Nawaz Sharif was returning. They also slapped the leaders of the PMLN with an anti-terrorism act. They charged them with an FIR. Therefore, it seems that this election, with all political parties, the ANP, the Pakistan People's Party and the PMLN are saying that they are being denied a level playing field, that there has been pre-poll rigging, and only one political party has been given the level playing field or has been given a free hand to contest this election.
Munize, can you explain who you're saying that you were not allowed, as other networks were not allowed to air Nawaz Sharif's interviews or his return to Pakistan? Not allowed by whom?
Well, it's very obvious that it was not allowed by the establishment. And it is very clear to us right now that the military did not want the current TV channels to air any of the Nawaz Sharif footage. It has been openly said by many journalists now on the ground. What we have now is a caretaker government. So in Pakistan, it's not, elections go from one government to the other, and in between there's a caretaker government for 3 months that ensures a free and fair election. It seems that the caretaker government is absent. When they were asked why we were not allowed to air this, they said that this is not in our domain. The PEMRA, which is the Pakistan Electronic Media Regulatory Authority, we passed an ordinance, and by that PEMRA has become independent. And so we asked, well, PEMRA has become independent and it has, slapped all these bans on the media. So what do you mean PEMRA has become independent? So PEMRA has now, they say, has been given complete authority, and PEMRA keeps on sending us notices which says that you cannot say anything against the judiciary and the armed forces of Pakistan. They quote a constitutional provision which does exist in the Constitution of Pakistan but has never been used before. So they use that in order to quash dissent. And I think that's the real problem, that although we do not see the military come out in the forefront, there are organizations that are being used by the military. For example, PEMRA is one, and it is being accused of being used by the military. On the other hand, other political parties, other political leaders have accused Imran Khan of using airspace that was denied to them, or facilities by the army that were denied to them. Imran Khan actually used the Noor Khan Air Base, which belongs to the military and is only reserved for heads of state, and it is only reserved for the military. But he was allowed to use that, and other political parties, other political leaders were not allowed to use that. On the other hand, we have also seen with Haroon Balor, the leader who was killed by the ANP, he was not given protection simply because the Chief Justice at the time, Chief Justice Saqib Nisar, gave an order saying that all protection should be brought back and should be retracted, simply because politicians don't need protection. So he was not given the protection that he needed. He was getting threats. He's somebody who was attacked before. His uncle had been killed by a suicide bomber. His father had been killed by a suicide bomber. However, he was not given the due protection, and his party believes that if he was given that protection, then he would still be alive today.
I wanted to ask you about the U.S. role in Pakistan. In January, I think it was President Trump's first tweet of 2018. He tweeted, "The United States has foolishly given Pakistan more than $33 billion in aid over the last 15 years, and they've given us nothing but lies and deceit. Thinking of our leaders as fools, they give safe haven to the terrorists we hunt in Afghanistan with little help, no more." Those were Trump's first words in a tweet of 2018. Can you talk about the U.S. role in Pakistan and how it affects your politics and your elections?
Well, the U.S. has interfered a lot in Pakistani politics. It has been monitoring very closely what has been happening in Pakistan. We all know that the United States looks at Pakistan from the prism of Afghanistan. So their focus has really been on trying to clamp down on militant outfits that are fighting this war in Afghanistan. However, what is interesting in this election is, I'm sure that you must have all been reading that there are extremist Islamist groups for the first time that are taking part in this election. And one of them is Hafiz Saeed. He's banned by the United States. His party, the Jamaatul Dawa, is banned by the United Nations because it's alleged that he had a role to play in the Mumbai attacks. The other party is Allahu Akbar Party. They had a very successful protest in Islamabad. They pretty much shut down Islamabad and Rawalpindi. And it was only after the army brokered a deal between them and the government, because they were protesting against the government, demanding that the law minister resign, that they were allowed, to go back. And they were not even charged with the damage they caused to public property and how they beat up policemen. So it is these two political parties who are taking part in the election, and this is part of a policy of the military to mainstream militant outfits. When I interviewed the defense minister, the former defense minister, Khurram Dastagir of Nawaz Sharif's government, he said that that was a major bone of contention between the military and between the Nawaz Sharif government of whether to allow these extremist militant groups to enter the mainstream politics or not.
Munizeh, I want to go to one of the leading Pakistani journalists and publishers, Hamid Haroon, who publishes the Dawn newspaper. He spoke to the BBC earlier this week in a widely circulated and controversial interview. He spoke to BBC Hard Talk's Stephen Sacker, who asked him whether he believes the Pakistani military is favouring particular candidates in the upcoming elections.
I think there's a preferred face of Pakistan they'd like to see.
Who?
The security forces and the establishment.
No. Who do they favour, in your opinion?
I think that at this point there appears to be an attempt to favour second-level string leaders and a patch-up coalition which would rule with direction from the deep state.
So, Munizeh, that's Hamid Haroon talking about the deep state. Now, you talked earlier about the fact that the military is preventing, putting obstacles before other political parties, but Imran Khan's party, Tehreek-e-Insaf, or the Movement for Justice, is granted an exception. Could you explain why you think that is? What is Imran Khan's relationship to the military?
It looks like our Democracy Now! Stream to Pakistan is frozen. We'll see if Munizai Jahangir, if it can... it looks like we're going to have to leave that question there, but of course we will continue to cover the Pakistan elections. Munizai Jahangir is a Pakistani writer and journalist, host and executive producer of a political talk show on one of Pakistan's leading networks. She's the daughter of Pakistan's leading human rights activist and lawyer who died of a heart attack earlier this year, Asma Jahangir. She's on the board of Asma Jahangir Foundation and Council, member of the Human Rights Commission of Pakistan. This is Democracy Now! When we come back, we go to Yemen with the remarkable PBS correspondent Jane Ferguson. Stay with us.
सुफना कर दे सच कुड़िए सुफना कर दे सच कुड़िए दिल दे वेड़े विच नच कुड़िए दिल दे वेड़े विच नच कुड़िए नच कुड़िए वेख तेरे नैन बलौरी वेख तेरे नैन बलौरी.
Song by Asif Bhatti and Ensemble. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Nermeen Sheikh.
We spend the rest of the hour in Yemen, where Houthi rebels say they're prepared to hand over the crucial port of Hodeidah to the United Nations if U.S.-backed Saudi-led coalition halt military operations there. Last month, tens of thousands of civilians fled the city when coalition forces launched an all-out offensive there. The UN warned the offensive would severely exacerbate the ongoing humanitarian crisis in Yemen, which is already experiencing the world's worst cholera epidemic, with more than 1 million people afflicted and with millions more on the brink of famine. This is UN humanitarian coordinator Lise Grand.
Most of the 8.5 million people that we describe as being pre-famine, the reality of their life is that when they wake up in the morning, they have no idea if they will eat that day. No idea. 8.5 million people are in that category. The UN estimates that by the end of the year, if there is not an end to this war, another 10 million Yemenis will be in that same situation. That's 18 million innocent civilians who are the victims of this war. And that's why all humanitarians are saying, enough is enough. There has to be a political solution, and the parties to the conflict have to sit at that table and agree on how to stop this.
That's a clip from PBS NewsHour's exclusive 3-part series by correspondent Jane Ferguson, who recently smuggled herself into northern Yemen to report on the widespread famine and devastation there.
The only way into rebel-held Yemen is to smuggle yourself in. And for me, that means to be dressed entirely as a Yemeni woman with a full face veil just to get through the checkpoints.
I travelled across the embattled front lines to see what's actually happening inside what the United Nations is calling the world's worst humanitarian disaster.
We'll speak with PBS correspondent Jane Ferguson now in Beirut about what she saw in Yemen. But first, we're going to her report. It was part 2 of her 3-part exclusive PBS series. This piece is called American-Made Bombs in Yemen Are Killing Civilians, Destroying Infrastructure, and Fueling Anger at the U.S.
Inside rebel territory in Yemen, the war rains down from the sky. On the ground, front lines have not moved much in the past 3 years of conflict. Instead, an aerial bombing campaign by the Saudi-led and American-backed coalition hammers much of the country's north, leaving scenes like this dotted across the capital city Sana'a and beyond. A few weeks before I arrived, this gas station was hit. Security guard Abdul al-Badwi was in a building next door when it happened. He says 6 civilians were killed.
ليش يستهدفوا هون? Why did they target here?
أنا ما ندري إيش السبب. ما ندري إيش السبب.
Can't explain why they would have targeted something like this.
Elsewhere in the city, a government office building was recently hit. Another pile of rubble. Another monument to the civilian deaths of this war.
When this building was hit, it was mostly clerical workers in offices who were injured, and you can still see their blood smeared all over the walls as they were evacuated after the airstrike.
In 2014, Yemeni rebels called Houthis seized the capital and much of the rest of the country. The Houthis are supported by Sunni Saudi Arabia's arch-rival, Shiite Iran. So the next year, the Saudis mobilized a coalition of Arab militaries to defeat the group. The aerial bombing campaign has not managed to dislodge the rebels, but it has hit weddings, hospitals, and homes. The U.S. military supports the Saudi coalition with logistics and intelligence. The United States also sells the Saudis and their coalition partners many of the bombs they drop on Yemen. In the mountains outside the capital, we gained exclusive access to the site where the Houthis store unexploded American-made bombs, like this 2,000-pound Mark 84 bomb made in Garland, Texas. It landed in the middle of the street in the capital, we are told. One of the men here told me where each was found around Sana'a.
1 month ago, it landed near the Sadaka Bridge, next to the Central Bank of Yemen. It didn't explode.
He also showed me the fin of a Mark 82 bomb, used to guide it to its target. Back in the city, the Houthis also let us see a storage site with the remains of American-made cluster bombs. Cluster bombs are among the most deadly to civilians, filled with baseball-sized smaller bombs that scatter over a larger area. Any that don't explode stay where they fell, primed, and often wounding civilians like landmines. The Houthis have also targeted civilians, throwing anyone suspected of opposing them in jail. I traveled deep into Yemen's countryside to find out more about how the bombing campaign is affecting people's lives there. This is what I found, a Doctors Without Borders cholera treatment center completely destroyed by an airstrike the day before. It was just about to open its doors to patients. The war has made it harder for people to access clean running water, leading to the worst cholera outbreak in modern history. Now, every time the rains come, people fall ill.
Cholera is a seasonal disease here in Yemen, and that's why the aid organizations are getting ready for the worst of the cholera season coming up. This facility was brand new.
No one was killed here, but the loss of the precious medical facility filled with life-saving equipment is devastating.
It's quite clearly a contravention of humanitarian law. There's no question about that.
The United Nations warns the Saudi-led coalition on the location of thousands of humanitarian facilities across the country, requesting they don't bomb them. Lise Grande is the UN Development Program Coordinator in Yemen.
If you look at the total number of requests that we have in and the total number of violations, there have been few violations compared to the requests, but when those violations occur, they are serious indeed.
In a refugee camp closer to the fighting along the Saudi border, people told me they were attacked by warplanes in the last camp they lived in. In 2015, Mazraq refugee camp was bombed by coalition jets. Radia Hussein lost a grandson in the attack and walked for days to get here.
They attacked the camp with 3 missiles in 1 day, and then we ran away.
On the road to the refugee camp, several bridges had been bombed. Anger towards America is growing in rebel-held areas of Yemen. Most people here, whether they support the Houthis or not, know that many of the bombs being dropped are American. It provides a strong propaganda tool for the Houthi rebels, who go by the slogan, "Death to America." Dr. Ali Al-Muta is a college professor. He did his doctorate in the U.S., but is a strong Houthi supporter.
The missiles that killed us, American-made. The plane that kills us, American-made. The tanks, Abrams, American made. You're saying to me, where is America? America is the whole thing.
Despite desperate efforts to end the fighting in Yemen, the violence is getting worse. The Saudi-led coalition launched an attack on Houthi-controlled Hodeidah city last month. The city is home to hundreds of thousands of Yemenis, and aid organizations warned that the attack could kill many civilians. As the bombs began to fall, these people fled to the capital, Sana'a.
My house is a traditional house, and when the bomb landed, the gate was blown off and the roof was gone.
Dura Issa's house was hit. Her family got out alive, but she is now homeless, trying to care for her severely disabled son.
I don't know where to stay tonight. We don't have money for a hotel. We cannot afford it. We left in a hurry, scared. We left everything.
Ahead of the battle, the coalition warned civilians to get out.
The coalition announced on the TV that we have to leave. They didn't tell us anything. They just told us to go out. The Houthis made trenches. My house is next to the sea, and the battles are there.
Millions of Yemenis are just like him, living in fear of the battle raging near their homes or an airstrike killing them and their families. Both the Houthis and the Saudi-led coalition have disregarded innocent civilian life in this war. Every bomb that falls on a hospital, office building or home causes more unease about where they came from.
That was Jane Ferguson reporting from Yemen for the PBS NewsHour. When we come back, we'll go to Beirut, Lebanon. Jane has come out of Yemen, which she smuggled herself into, and speak directly with her. Stay with us.
وشاوكيني شغليا أفتش نبشي مناخسي وشاوكيني شغليا
Yemen Blues by Yemen Blues. This is Democracy Now! I'm Amy Goodman with Nermeen Sheikh.
We're spending the rest of the hour in Yemen. We're joined in Beirut by Jane Ferguson, special correspondent for PBS NewsHour.
Jane is just back from Yemen, where she spent nearly a month reporting this remarkable three-part series for PBS NewsHour on widespread starvation in Yemen, American financing of the Saudi-backed coalition there, and Houthi rebels. Her recent piece in The New Yorker is headlined, "Is Intentional Starvation the Future of War?" Jane, welcome to Democracy Now! I mean, the bravery of you even going into Yemen, which particularly shows what the Yemeni people face. Explain how you got there. And then this piece we just aired, where you talk about the U.S. support for what's happening, how you found this evidence.
Getting into Yemen itself is not as complicated, or not even close to as complicated, as getting into northern Yemen. Journalists from some, outlets, including American outlets, have been granted visas and allowed to board flights into the south of Yemen. And that's the area that the Saudi-led coalition controls, and that's into the capital of the south, which is Aden. And you can fly in there, and I was able to get a visa to get to Aden after a couple of attempts and board a flight to Aden. And from there, as you would have seen in that report, I basically had to drive north. You can drive north across the front line. Yemenis themselves, civilians, are moving back and forth, but you have to go through dozens of checkpoints. I wasn't able to film them, obviously, for the piece as I was smuggling my way up. But it took sort of several cars and various routes to be able to get up there, disguised as a Yemeni woman. And, you know, once I got there, I had to work with a Yemeni team because I could only really smuggle myself up. I couldn't bring my cameraman and have him passed off as a believable Yemeni woman. So I worked with a Yemeni team when I was in Sana'a, journalists and friends that I've known for some time. Now, it's worth pointing out that news organizations all around the world, and particularly American news organizations, have been trying to access Sana'a, and they very much so want to report from Houthi-controlled areas, but journalists are banned. The Saudis control the airspace, and they ban journalists and human rights researchers from boarding the UN flights. Only UN flights land in Sana'a, in the capital that is Houthi-controlled. And so journalists for a long time from various news organizations, all the major networks in the U.S. have been trying to access those areas, but they've not been permitted to go. So, you know, it really is a case of whoever can smuggle their way up there, and that's extremely challenging logistically because then you end up with one staff member up there and not a support team. So when I was there, you know, as you pointed out, a major focus on the reporting is the fact that this is a war that perhaps not so visually on the ground the United States is involved in, but behind the scenes the United States is supporting this war. They are supporting the Saudi-led coalition. And when the Saudi-led coalition formed in 2015, it was Barack Obama, then President of the United States, obviously, he brought in support. He supported the coalition's efforts, not with boots on the ground, but certainly with the logistics that was mentioned there. Some of those logistics include things like refueling Saudi jets in between bombing raids, that if they can be refueled mid-air by United States Air Force jets, that helps them. It makes the process much more efficient. Also, the sale of weapons, over $100 billion worth of U.S. weapons agreed in sales to the Saudis, often agreed by Obama, but then confirmed by President Trump. There's also various logistical and intelligence support, and this is really where, you know, the Yemenis that I spoke to were coming from in terms of why they saw this as a United States war. And when I would put this question to them, even privately off camera, to people who didn't wish to speak on camera because they were not supporters of the Houthis or the coalition, they would say, you know, we feel very much so like this is a United States war. And also when you're on the ground there, like I said in my report, the Houthis are able to use this as a very strong propaganda tool because they're able to couch this war in terms of a jihad, a religious war against not only foreign invaders like Saudis, but they will say, you know, whenever they're trying to recruit fighters, that this is a war against foreign invaders who are, you know, fighting against Islam.
Well, Jane, one of the weapons that the U.S. has sold to the Saudis, as you witnessed and discussed in your piece, are cluster bombs. Could you talk about what you learned about the effects of these bombs? I mean, this is a weapon that is banned by 102 countries. Explain what the effects of cluster bombs are.
Well, a cluster bomb, effectively, when it's dropped, it explodes just before it hits the ground. And it can contain anything from dozens to up to hundreds of smaller bombs. They're around about the size of a baseball. And they are just miniature bombs primed to explode. And they spread out over a wider area. They can be particularly deadly for civilians, especially in countries where people live in, you know, non-brick or non-concrete homes. So areas where people live in mud homes or wattle homes, straw huts, they can be particularly dangerous in those situations. But they also they have a particularly poor fail rate, where if they land, not all of the small munitions will explode. And so they will remain primed on the ground, and they can be picked up by a child. They can randomly explode much later. And that's why cluster bombs are seen as such a deadly weapon, because they can act like mines as well as an explosive that spreads itself out.
Well, Jane, your piece also ends with a remarkable and horrific statistic that an estimated 130 Yemeni children died every day in 2017 from extreme hunger and disease. Now, you point out in this piece, as well as your piece in The New Yorker, that this is a man-made a disaster, that there is, in fact, food in Yemen. It's just that people no longer have the means to buy that food because millions of workers have been put out of work or who are simply not being paid. Can you talk about that?
Sure. This is the real toll of the war. Of course, civilians are dying in these airstrikes, but not in anywhere near to the numbers of people who are falling ill and dying from the humanitarian crisis that has been caused by this war. Of course, you know, you'll hear the statistic, Yemen is the world's worst humanitarian disaster. But that's really just a phrase. And it was, you know, one of the reasons I wanted to go into rebel-held Yemen was because no one really understands what that looks like. What does that mean to a viewer? And what it means is a third of the country, an entire third, over 8 million people on the brink of starvation, meaning they're not getting enough nutrients. They cannot afford to buy enough food to feed themselves and their families sufficiently. And, you know, the statistics on the deaths of children are particularly startling. And that's because, of course, as anywhere in the world, children are the most susceptible to, you know, falling ill from malnutrition. They can die of starvation. They can also, and more often is the case, die of infectious diseases because their bodies have become so weak. And so when I traveled to various, you know, hospitals and went to the children's wards, which are pretty much now just malnutrition wards, you'll see absolutely terrifyingly thin children, and you'll see a small trickle of them every single day. A lot of parents can't afford to bring their children to clinics or hospitals in rural capitals because the cost of fuel has gone up, which means a bus ride will be more expensive. And the reason that this is man-made, and the reason that, you know, every NGO and humanitarian organization has pointed out that this is man-made, is that it is caused by the war. There hasn't been a weather pattern or a particular natural disaster. There is plenty of food getting into Yemen. Now, what is happening is that the food prices are higher than they should be. They're higher than they were before. That's partly because of the Saudi-led coalition's blockade on the area. They're allowing food in, but it's restricted, and it's a slow process, and it's an expensive process because the ships that import the food they get held up for weeks at a time. They have to be inspected. And so that process is particularly difficult. Yemen imports the vast majority of its food. It has done since long before this war. So those prices going up have also been coupled with the fact that the economy, certainly in the north, but also really all over Yemen, is on its knees, if not has collapsed, essentially. You'll see people have just lost their jobs. And so it doesn't really matter how much food there is in the supermarket, and it doesn't really matter how expensive it has become, because if you have absolutely no money, then you're not going to be able to buy it anyway. And that's why Yemenis are hungry. They're hungry because of the economic collapse, and the economic collapse is as a direct result of this war.
Jane Ferguson, I wanted to go back to your third exclusive piece for the PBS NewsHour on Yemen, where you report on the Houthi rebels. This is a clip from your series. This is Salim Moghalis, a member of the Houthis' political wing, who told you they took the missiles from Yemen's military arsenal when they captured the capital, Sana'a.
The Yemeni people and army have missiles from the past, and the army and experts were able to improve and upgrade these missiles, which is necessary. We are able to produce all sorts of arms so they can upgrade the old weapons to have longer ranges.
Beyond the politics, this war has created the world's worst humanitarian disaster. Millions are on the brink of starvation, and the worst cholera outbreak in modern history rages on.
After 3 years of war, people here are weary of the airstrikes and the blockade. But they also tell us they believe America could end it.
In Sana'a's market, people are hopeful for an end to the crisis soon.
Since America has the biggest position in the UN, it should have pushed for political and economic resolutions to the conflict. Look, now the people are almost dead. Poverty, hunger, disease, death, injuries. And on top of all that, the war planes are hitting us.
Meanwhile, in Washington, efforts by some to end the U.S.'s support for the Saudis continue.
Vote yes, vote no. Do not vote.
A bipartisan group of senators, including Vermont independent Bernie Sanders, failed to get a resolution passed in March, which aimed to limit the White House's authority to get involved in this war.
We think that, in fact, this war is unauthorized, and it is, in fact, unconstitutional. Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution is pretty clear. It's the United States Congress that declares war. The president cannot do what he wants unilaterally. The president does not have the authority.
President Trump enjoys warm relations with the Saudis, especially the country's powerful crown prince, Mohammed bin Salman. The White House is currently pushing for further arms sales of precision-guided missiles to the kingdom. Some fellow Republicans argue the Saudis deserve America's support in this war. Idaho Republican James Risch sits on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee.
The Iranians are in there, and they are causing the difficulty that's there. If the Iranians would back off, I have no doubt that the Saudis will back off. But the Saudis have the absolute right to defend themselves.
To others, it's not America's job to defend a nation that doesn't reflect its values.
I don't know that I have ever participated in a vote which says that the United States must be an ally to Saudi's militaristic ambitions. You know, this is a despotic regime which treats women as third-class citizens. There are no elections there. They have their own goals and their own ambitions.
American support for Saudi Arabia is a major propaganda tool for the Houthis, who frame their war here as a form of jihad against the U.S., a religious battle. But it's a battle that neither side is winning, regardless of who America helps. Instead, the conflict is defined most clearly by those who are losing, the civilians struggling to live with its consequences. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Jane Ferguson in Sana'a, Yemen.
And Jane Ferguson is with us right now, back in Beirut, special correspondent for the PBS NewsHour. The power of what you're saying there, that the people who are losing right now is what counts. The massive hunger, the cholera epidemic. Jane, the fact that journalists rarely go to the north the way you smuggled yourself in, with the Saudis not allowing that, because you see the effects of their bombing and you see the actual bombs and you make that connection to the U.S. Your final comment in the minute that we have.
I would point out that exactly as you say, this is a war which has had a terrible toll on the people of Yemen, and that's a toll that is unmatched anywhere in the world. Nowhere in the world has a statistic like 1/3 of an entire country's population is on the brink of starvation. There are attempts going on right now to broker more serious peace talks, and there is a way to end this war if all sides negotiate in good faith and are truly willing to make the compromises necessary. And so it is possible that Yemen could see peace before the end of the year if there is enough political will there.
We want to thank you very much, Jane Ferguson, speaking to us from Beirut, Lebanon, just returned from Yemen, where she did this remarkable three-part series for the PBS NewsHour. To see the three-part series, you can watch it at pbs.org/newshour. That does it for our show. To get a transcript of the show or to watch the video or audio podcast, go to democracynow.org. Democracy Now! Is currently accepting applications for a full-time news producer position in New York City. Visit democracynow.org to learn more and apply today. To get our news headlines every day, our Democracy Now! Newsletter, send the word Democracy Now! To 66866. That's Democracy Now! One word to 66866. Democracy Now! Produced by Renee Feldstein and Guz Derman, Ramin Sheikh, Carla Wills, Laura Gottesdiener, Sam Alkoff, John Hamilton, Robbie Karen, Hani Massoud, Libby Rainey. I'm Amy Goodman with Nermin Sheikh.